Friends, Frank Turek with you the day after Resurrection Sunday. My question for you is, if you see somebody in need on the street in particular, somebody's looking for a handout, as a Christian, you should want to help that person. Even as a non-Christian, you want to help that person. The question is, how do you do it? I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm wondering, is this person really in need? Is this a scam? Look, this is just my skeptical self, right? And if I give this person any assistance, if I give this person money directly, am I going to be hurting that person more than helping? Is that person going to take this money and go buy alcohol or buy drugs? And what do we do now? The food banks are exploding because people are lining up. There's millions unemployed now. How do we really help people in this time of crisis? We want to give people hope. And that's what this show is called, as you know, Hope One. The reason you want to give people hope is there's only two things you can have in life. You can have either hope or you can have despair. Now, we all know our ultimate hope is in Jesus. But right now, as we go through this crisis, people also need hope in the sense that they need a place to live, or they need to put food on the table, or they need money to pay the bills. The question is, how can we help? And in order to do that, I want to bring on Bryan Crain, who is actually the Chief Operating Officer of the Orange County Rescue Mission in California. He happens to be married to, of course, Natasha Crain, who, as you know, was our first guest on this program about 2 weeks ago. But Bryan is heading up the Orange County Rescue Mission, and he's going to give us some insights on how all of us can help in this time of need. So, Bryan, welcome to Hope One. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me, Frank. It's an honor.
Oh, absolutely. I know that sometimes people may call you Mr. Natasha Crain, but, but you are doing some great work on your own. We know Natasha does great work in apologetics, particularly apologetics for kids, but you're doing great work helping the homeless, helping the hungry. Tell everybody watching right here, and before we get into this, I want to point out that we're going to give you some practical ways on how you can help the homeless and how you can help the hungry, regardless of where you live. You don't have to live in Ocean County, California. I'm just bringing Bryan on here because he's a wealth of information and he's on the ground actually helping people. And we're going to show you a way you can help people in your community, wherever that is. So don't go anywhere. Bryan, how did you get involved in the Ocean County Rescue Mission? I mean, you were in radio for a while. How did this all happen? Orange County, not Ocean County, Orange County.
Right. Yeah. So my prior career was in the radio industry. When I was in college, a friend and I started a service that produced material for radio morning shows. And we did that for 20 years. And in fact, that company is still thriving. For me, my involvement with the homeless began probably about 12 years ago, just through a church program where we were going out and serving food to the homeless in the local area. And through a long chain of events, we became affiliated with the Orange County Rescue Mission because for me, it wasn't enough to just go and provide food for people. That was a start, but I wanted to be able to help people in a meaningful way, and teaming up with the rescue mission was a way for me to have an opportunity to tell people about something and a way for them to get out of the situation that they were in. Mm-hmm. So one chain of events from that led to me now becoming for 5 years now, I've been the Chief Operating Officer of the Orange County Rescue Mission. So I'm in charge of operations and the programming for the 12 campuses that we operate throughout Southern California, including our flagship campus, which is called the Village of Hope, which is a 262-bed transitional living facility in Tustin, California. Okay. It's actually on the 5 acres of land on a former Marine base in Tustin. Mm-hmm. And the housing is the Marine barracks for going back to the 1940s. So the aim of the program is for people to come in and transition out over the course of 18 to 24 months from whatever got them to a point of homelessness in the first place. So when they come in on day one, they're given a volunteer job assignment. They may work in the cafeteria, they may work in the janitorial crew or in the intake department or in our warehouse. And over the course of their time at the rescue mission, they will have a strong discipleship component. There's lots of opportunities for sobriety, be it classes or groups. There's life skills classes like personal finance, anger management. And there's a big job workshop program that helps people understand the techniques needed to interview and get a full-time job, which is the goal at the other end of the program. So our goal for the people that we serve, there's really four. Number one, that they would come to know Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Number two, that they would have a full-time job at the end of their time with us. Number three, that they would have their own housing that they can afford with their full-time job. Number four, that they're not relying on any sort of government assistance.
Wow, that's amazing. You're doing all that in Southern California, and you say you certainly want them to become Christians and share the gospel. You've been doing some apologetics with them, aren't you?
We are. Yes, you'll appreciate this, Frank. A few years ago, we realized that there's a component or a subset of our population that comes into the program that has really never heard the gospel. They're not familiar with the Bible. They've never been to church, and it's all new to them. And for some people, the personal testimony of others is a very compelling and attractive invitation to the gospel. Others you would see sitting on the sidelines saying, you know, this is interesting, and maybe I want this to be true, but I have some big questions. Not the least of which in our population is, why would a good God permit evil? Or perhaps even more personally to them, why would a good God permit the things that have happened to me, the horrible things that have happened to me? So we started a monthly apologetics program where we invite speakers to come and speak on sort of their areas of expertise. And we happen to be located in an area where a lot of great teachers live.
Yeah, you got it.
I think in the last couple of years, we've had Greg Kokel, Jay Warner Wallace, Craig Hazen, Sean McDowell, Mike Winger, Clay Jones, Natasha Crane. She's amazing. She does a great job.
Oh, I know. She is. Not that you're biased, but go ahead.
So it's great because we have these world-class teachers that come in and speak to our students. And our students, oh, by the way, we call all of our residents students. It's a way to instill a little bit more dignity.
Sure.
But our students lap it up. It's just a fun time because the speakers will present, and then our students will sit there and ask them questions until I have to cut them off. And they're well-meaning. There's not a lot of hostility there. It's not like they're trying to play gotcha, which, you know, I think you encounter more of that on college campuses, Frank. But it's just a great opportunity I think, for our students, and really also for the speakers who come out who are getting to minister to people in maybe a little kind of different setting of what they're accustomed to.
Now, you're doing all that, and obviously you're providing them food and shelter, but what are the greatest challenges you face, Bryan? First of all, just in normal times, and now, right now, in this coronavirus pandemic, what are the unique challenges you are facing?
Yeah. Well, in normal times, I would say our biggest challenge is always trying to fine-tune how we minister to different people in different populations, whether that be military veterans specifically, or single moms with their children who are progressing to the next stage. So that's a question of refining our ministries and maybe building new ministries and new campuses, which we've had the opportunity to do in recent years. During the COVID crisis, it's a little different. Number one, we had to spend considerable time and thought on how we were going to protect our campus. You know, 30 days ago, they were talking about how if you had one case in a shelter, we might quarantine the whole thing. We might quarantine the staff at the shelter. We had to give a lot of thought about what that would look like, perhaps where staff would live. We've done a lot to fortify, as I call it, the perimeter. We have people opening doors rather than when people come into the building, they don't have to touch the door handle, for example. We have hand sanitizing stations at every door, little things like that, protecting our intake department. We put up a glass at the front desk, and at the time that we did it, everybody looked at us like we were crazy. And now all the supermarkets are doing the same thing. So that's kind of a micro level of what we've had to do on our campus. I think broadly speaking, in the homeless world, the biggest challenge has been educating people that you do not want to get sick when you're on the streets. You know, there will always be a subset of the population that would prefer to not be in a shelter. But let's face it, you do not want to get this disease and be out on the streets. So there's been a considerable effort of really educating people on, this is not the time to be outside. If you can find your way to a shelter, do it. And in many places, I know in our county, they've really stepped up their efforts that if someone is going to get sick, there are opportunities for them to be quarantined, to be attended to, private hotel rooms. So the biggest challenge really is to try to get as many people off the streets, even if it's only temporarily during this crisis.
Now, are you maxed out right now in terms of your bed capacity?
We are maxed out at most of our campuses. In fact, all of the transitional campuses are maxed out. Now, the transitional campuses are programs are going through a program to transfer out of homelessness. We also operate an emergency shelter, which is more of a traditional shelter where people come in just for the night, maybe 1 or 2 nights while they, in a more emergency setting. We operate one of those on behalf of our city. Oddly enough, it's been kind of quiet over there, but one of the reasons it's quiet is because a lot of the outreach for that facility is done through the police department. And the police department has put all hands on deck on responding to phone calls other than doing outreach to the homeless. So it's kind of a function of less outreach in the middle of all this on behalf of the police department than really demand necessarily. But people are definitely coming into the transitional programs and saying, you know, now is the time for me to make a change. There was.
Now, you're not a food bank, but you do provide food for people. How do you go about doing that? And what kind of increase have you seen in, say, the past month or past few weeks when so many people are getting unemployed? What kind of change have you seen in the demand for that kind of service, Bryan?
Right. So we actually have a program that we call our grocery rescue program, where we go and pick up the food that wasn't sold at about 12 grocery stores, and we go 4 days a week, and we use a good portion of that at our facilities for our to prepare meals there. Mm-hmm. But a sizable portion of that we distribute to local ministries, local food banks, and the demand there has skyrocketed. I know in Orange County, we've been having these, the main food bank here has been having these events on Saturday at the Honda Center where the NHL Ducks play, where people can come and get food. And it's frightening how many people are coming to that. I say that, you know, these are people that are new to not being able to provide food for their right. families. So it's the uptick in demand from the food that we're able to provide is double, triple what it normally is. And then there's been kind of an odd distribution issue that in the very first days of this, grocery stores didn't have any food for us as they normally do, because everybody went and basically cleaned them out.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So there's a lot of hoarding going on that prevented. That's a cascade or ripple effect I never would have thought of, Bryan. So when we hoard stuff at the grocery store, we're actually preventing the real needy people from getting what they need.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And on the other side of that now, I was astounded last week to walk into the warehouse, and there were 96 1-gallon jugs of milk there, whereas weeks ago there was no milk to be had. And what that said to me was that the grocery stores, I don't know if they're doing that in your neck of the woods, but they're limiting how much milk you can get. So we went from there was no milk to they've limited it so much that now they're giving us milk. So it's really, and then I saw an article that the dairy farmers are having to dump milk because there's so.
Well, it might be happening with with toilet paper too. I went into Walmart on Friday, and on their opening display as you walk in was just lined with toilet paper.
Right.
Maybe because they've limited how much you can actually buy at one trip.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you had seen that 2 or 3 weeks ago, you wouldn't have believed it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Now, here's a question we all want an answer to, Bryan, because all of us that want to help the hungry and want to help the homeless struggle with what is the best way to do that. Because I've heard, and I would love your expert opinion on this, I've heard that sometimes helping often hurts. In other words, it can be counterproductive, because if you give money to people directly, if they're on the street, they might use it for alcohol, they might use it for drugs. What is the best way to really help people who are in that situation?
Right. It's a great question. And people, like you said, Christians and non-Christians alike wrestle with this. My advice is, if you have the capacity and the time, is to not just give somebody $5 on the street, but to try to forge a relationship with them so that you might be a conduit for them to take the next step out of that. So what does that look like? You know, if you encounter the same person on the freeway off-ramp every day, or you encounter a person on your way into the office, that is a great opportunity to not just throw them a couple of bucks, but to actually talk to them, to learn their name, to maybe hear their story, to understand why they're out there. I've heard it said that when doing outreach to homeless, it can take as many as 80 encounters before someone is willing to trust you to offer whatever the next step is. So giving people money can hurt. I'm not going to sit here and say you shouldn't give somebody a couple of dollars or maybe buy them a meal somewhere. But the way to really engage and to make a difference is to create a relationship. And you can do that on your own with people that you encounter in your daily life, or you can team up with a ministry or your church or a gospel rescue mission in your neck of the woods that already does this, and go out and meet people and go out and know their story. Maybe be the only person that week that addresses them by their first name. And as long as you do that and have a plan for how you might help them take the next step, you are helping them in many ways that you may not even see until further down the road, but you are helping them.
Bryan, you understand you are actually asking us to do some work here. What? The goal of you, Bryan, actually have to do some work, to actually get to know people and actually try and help them that way. Now, in many cases, you can't do that, though. You're seeing somebody once on the street corner. They're looking for a handout. What really is the best way to help such a person? How do you do it at the rescue mission? What do you do?
So we give our volunteers and our donors, we give them cards. They're the size of a business card, and all they say on the card, it says "need help" with a question mark, and then it has our intake phone number and our website. And so we give those to people. I keep a stack of them in my car. And if I encounter someone, I will give them a couple of bucks, and I'll give them the card as well. And if they're game, I'll have a conversation with them. I remember one time the family was walking into a department store, and there was a guy sitting on the bench out there. And it was kind of unusual for him to be out there. And I told Natasha, I said, take the kids in. I sat down next to him and had a very long conversation with him about his situation. I gave him the card, and, he never called, and that's okay. But that's part of this whole doing outreach in an effective way, is that you have to be willing to have the conversations, and you have to understand that most people are not going to call after one visit. But to your point, Frank, yes, repeated visits and repeated conversations do yield results, and they do yield people that are going to say, you know what, I will give this a shot, and I will take the next step. So if you can identify a organization in your community that's providing help, and you know what the resources are, you can either make cards on your own, or maybe they have their card, and you can have those to give to people as a resource. And I was going to share, I think we talked about this in advance, Frank, there's a website that lists all the gospel rescue missions in the country.
Yeah, share that, because one of the problems that we have, I'm even having here in Charlotte where I live, is I want to discover a place, Bryan, that not only will help their physical needs, but also their spiritual needs. Most of the food banks that I've looked up locally are secular. They used to be Christian and now they're secular. I don't know if it's because they've taken government money and they can't give the message anymore or whatever the reason is. And so I want to find an organization that will do both. I know nationally there are organizations that do that, whether it's to help somebody physically like Samaritan's Purse does. You know, they're going to go in there. Franklin Graham's going to go in there with the gospel, and he's going to go in there with whatever physical needs they have. So this website that you're about to give us will help our viewers, you out there, find a place locally in your community that can provide not only the physical needs, but the spiritual needs of the people that they're trying to help. What is that website, Bryan? Where can people learn more?
Yes, the website is citygatenetwork.org, citygatenetwork.org. It's actually an association of gospel rescue missions. So all of the rescue missions that do proclaim the gospel, that do share Jesus with people, that it lists all of them. You can put in your zip code and it'll identify those that are within a 10-mile to 100-mile radius of you. And you can feel them out, talk to them, see if it's an opportunity for you to volunteer with your small group at church. I know at our facility, we can't do what we do without the local churches. It's so key. We consider ourselves.
You have from churches. How does that work?
Sure. We consider churches to be our partners in this, and we want to be the outreach arm of any local church that wants to get involved. So, for example, we have a church that does a Bible study once a week. We have many churches that do a meal once a month. We have a church that came along and established a mentorship program. So professionals in that church establish a one-on-one mentorship opportunity with the students that are coming in through our program. There was a gentleman who owned a auto mechanic garage, and he established a relationship with someone who wanted to become a mechanic. So there's really no limit on how churches can get involved. It really just takes initiative and consistency.
You know, I talked to a pastor, a friend of mine here in Charlotte yesterday, and his church has decided to give $1 million to a local organization that's a Christian organization to help the homeless and to help the hungry. And of course, they want to provide volunteers as well. So friends, maybe that's the best way to do it, to go to your church and see if your church can help. Or also go to this website you see at the bottom of the screen, citygatenetwork.org. And this is an association of gospel-centered rescue missions around the country. Bryan Crain here is the Chief Operating Officer of Orange County in California. But there are, 1,000 of these maybe around the country, Bryan? How many rescue missions are there? Do we even know?
Yeah, I'm guessing that's probably pretty accurate based on the size of everyone that comes to the conferences every year that the Citygate Network puts on. It's actually pretty encouraging to be in a room with thousands of people who operate and work in this field, because sometimes it feels like we're swimming upstream and we're the only one doing this sort of work. You know, not the traditional, I would say, in this day, the secular and sort of governmental approach to homelessness is give people a house and call it a day. Get them off the streets, give them housing before anything. And right. So it's the gospel rescue missions that realize that you're ministering to the entire need of the person, that the food, clothing, shelter part is almost a given, that we need to move beyond that and get to the part about ministering to the whole person, ministering to them and helping them out of their addictions. And that's what gospel rescue missions strive to do.
Yeah, because if you don't help change the behavior of the person, they're going to be right back to where they were in a couple of months, right? I mean, how can they take care of a home if they don't have a job and they're on some sort of illicit drug or alcohol, that kind of thing? You've got to help change the person in order to get long-term change. And that's what you guys do, I assume.
Yeah, we like to say that homelessness is never the root issue. It's never, ever the root issue. Homelessness is downstream of addiction, mental illness, abuse, broken families, and trafficking. Homelessness is downstream of all of those things. And so you're right, Frank. If you just give somebody a house, help them in any meaningful way, all you've really done is gotten them off the streets and maybe reduced your homeless numbers a little bit. But have you empowered them to not be dependent on you or the government, whoever is providing the house, in a year or 2 years? And so it's not just, it's actually good policy in a sense to be helping people to care for themselves and not be dependent on other ministries or on the government long term.
In a few minutes, friends, we're going to go to questions. I have a few more questions for Bryan before we do that, but we're going to go to your questions. If you'd like to ask a question of Bryan on any of this, you can. If you'd like to ask a question of me on theology, apologetics, philosophy, you can do that as well. Just type the word question in big caps and make sure your question is succinct to the point in full, complete English, a full, complete sentence, because we're going to have to scroll through a lot of them, and we'll try and take as many as we can. You can put it on the YouTube feed or the Facebook feed, wherever you're watching, and we'll try and get to your question here shortly. You know, Bryan, you and I have a mutual friend in J. Warner Wallace, Jim Wallace, out there in California. And he used to go to Skid Row to minister to people. And he actually had people on Skid Row tell him, stop trying to change us. We want to live here. And yes, we're going to use your money for drugs. That's what we want to do. I mean, unfortunately, I think that probably taints everybody we see on the street who has that same kind of attitude. In your experience, how many people that you come across who are homeless and hungry, how many of them really want to get off the street and really want to change their situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do a monthly or a weekly chili van outreach to the hardest hit area of Santa Ana. Mm-hmm. I tell volunteers that go out on that the majority of people you're going to encounter are only there for the chili. They're only there for that hot cup of coffee.
All right.
But we're looking at this from the perspective of that we are providing a hand up rather than a handout. So you can't be in a position to provide people a hand up if you're not there to first offer them something of interest. And in our case, that's a hot cup of coffee with a hot bowl of chili. There will always be, every single time you go out, there will always be a small percentage of the population that is new to that environment, have possibly hit rock bottom and realize that there's only one way out and that they need to stop doing what they're doing, or are otherwise just ready to make a change. And it is not our job to figure out who's going to be receptive and who's not in advance. We go ready to serve. And if people don't want to hear it, and if people don't want anything other than the bowl of chili, that's okay, because you will always, always encounter someone who is ready to make a change. And if you go and feed 200 people on a given night, but you talk to 2 of them who then come into the rescue mission the next day, well, then you've done a great job. It's just that can be discouraging to people who maybe come out one time or come out with a church group for the first time. And I understand why people feel that way, but there is always an opportunity to reach at least one person who's ready to make a change.
How do you treat addiction, Bryan? Because I assume that's probably a big reason why some of the people that you try and minister to are where they are. What do you do for them?
It's a huge reason. In fact, we ask people on the way in questions to kind of get a baseline of where they're at. And on the way into the program, 66% of people openly admit that they are struggling with an addiction. So that's just self-disclosed, and I would venture that it's actually a higher percentage than
Probably
that.
Higher, yeah. Those are just the ones that admit it, right? Yeah.
Correct. My answer to that is Jesus. is offering them the hope that is to be found in Jesus. And, you know, you might expect that from a Christian ministry, but here's the thing. Most of us have never been at rock bottom. Most of us have never been in a situation where there was literally no one else to call and nowhere else to go. And we burned every bridge, as addicts often do. And to come to the realization that, number one, the creator of the universe has a plan for you and loves you, that's a startling revelation for a lot of people. And number two, all the guilt and shame associated with what's got them into that situation, all the things that have happened to them can be laid at the foot of the cross. And on the other side of that, of surrendering your life to Jesus, there's hope, there's freedom, and there really is a light that goes off. I've seen it countless times in people's heads that there is hope on the other side of this, that the creator of the universe loves me and has a plan for me, and in fact, sent his son to die for me so that I can have freedom. That is effective, and it's in stark contrast to a lot of other approaches. And I'm not here to knock other approaches, but I do know that I've seen it work countless times, that people have new life through Jesus. And that is what organizations and the other gospel rescue missions are striving to achieve.
Well, I know that's been effective in prisons. Chuck Colson's ministry has proven that the spiritual conversion of prisoners actually has a direct bearing on their recidivism rate and obviously their behavior in the prison. So we would assume the same thing would happen with addicted patients or addicted students, as you call them, there with you. So that's certainly an important aspect. Now, do you have a facility whereby you put people who are addicted in a certain treatment program, or how do you do that?
No, the only thing that we do is if someone is actually high when they're coming into our program, we ask people that they have a clean drug test when they're coming into the transitional program. Prior to that, if someone needs to go through detox, we have relationships with local detox so that they can get through that, okay, and then enter into our program after that. So the real restriction is we want people to be clean when they come in, and if they can't be, then we refer them out to a detox. After that, they're in our program, and while they're here, we have 0 strikes on drugs and alcohol. There's it is just not tolerated at all. Mm-hmm. And it's not uncommon for someone to come in and they use it early on in the program, and we have to ask them to leave. Mm. And they can come back in 90 days. They can come back for an interview in 90 days. Mm-hmm. It's not uncommon for someone to come and strike out the first time and then come back after 90 days and give it a solid go. So it's about being willing to engage in an ongoing relationship with people so that they can make the change that they need to make, but not give up because the first conversation or the first go didn't go as planned.
Okay, just before we're about to go to questions here, but I asked Bryan one last question, and this is Bryan Crain. He is the Chief Operating Officer of the Orange County Rescue Mission, one of the bigger rescue missions in the country. And if you say, Frank, I don't live in Orange County, I don't live in California, I want to help people in my local community, so do I. See that bottom of the screen website, citygatenetwork.org. Go there. That is an association of rescue missions around the country that all want to share the gospel in addition to helping people with their physical needs. So you don't have to be in Orange County or California to help. You can go right to that website there. Now, of course, if you want to help the Orange County Rescue Mission, you can go to their website and donate there. All of the funds are raised. So they come from you, they come from churches, they do get some grant money, but most of the funds are raised. So if you want to help people directly, you can give to the Orange County Rescue Mission, or you can give to the rescue mission in your local community. Just go to citygatenetwork.org. We want to help the hungry, we want to help the homeless. Even if you're not a Christian, you should want to do that. Bryan, last question before we go to the questions of the audience here. And that is, can you share a success story or a couple of success stories about people that have gone through the program, where they started and where they are now?
Sure. So every quarter we do a graduation ceremony at the Village of Hope, and at that ceremony we film a video of each person, and we ask them to give sort of a brief summary, 30 seconds, of what got them into a homeless or near homeless situation to begin with, and then what they are doing next. And so for us, that's a very gratifying experience because a lot happens in 18 to 24 months, but it's such a process that you don't really see it all necessarily until it's put forth in that way. And so a lot of those videos are up at our website, which is rescuemission.org. The last graduation, we had a gentleman, he had served in the Navy, and he would say prior to entering the Navy, as a teenager, he was experimenting with drugs and alcohol. While he was in the Navy, that kept him on the straight and narrow. And that when he got out of the Navy, it's when the wheels started to fall off the bus. He lacked the structure that he was accustomed to. He lacked sort of the career progression that was laid out in front of him, and really got deep back into drugs to the point that he was living in his car. And he entered into our program, and we have a separate facility just for military veterans. And so at the graduation, he just shared that not only had he been clean and sober the whole time he was in it, but he was able to use his post 9/11 education money, and he's going to Concordia University in Irvine. He's in his second year there now.
Wow.
To be a drug and alcohol counselor on the other side. And he's just an example of, you don't want to give up on people. And there was a point where he was living in his car, right? And you would see a young man living in his car and probably want to stay away from him. But yet here he is 4 years later on the other side of that, going to Concordia University, as a Christian university, and striving to educate himself so that he can help others as a drug and alcohol counselor. So lots of stories like that. And it's very gratifying work when you can take a step back and really see those stories from start to finish.
That's the 2 Corinthians 1 story, that you can help other people if you've gone through the same kind of pain and suffering yourself. That's what that guy's doing right there. All right, let's bring the great Jorge Gill on, who's going to give us some questions from our viewing audience. Jorge, how are you?
What's happening, fellas? Doing great here, and we have some great questions. We want to start with Sam. Sam always have great questions, and Sam says, what's the best way to share the gospel with a homeless person who may not be coherent due to drugs or alcohol? I am in campus ministry and try to go out into our town, but conversations are not always the best.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I would come back to consistency. Look, when someone is drunk or high, you are not going to have a coherent conversation with them ever. But you can plant seeds. You can become that person that they may come to when they are coherent, when they are in a moment when they're not using drugs or alcohol. In fact, we have a story of a gentleman who came into our program who encountered one of our outreach workers at a time when he doesn't even remember the conversation. In fact, he woke up the next day and all he had in his hand was a quarter and one of those need help cards. When he woke up, now he was probably hungover, but he was sober enough to realize that in the moment he needed to make a change. Now, this was a time when payphones were readily found, and he went and put that quarter in and called the number, and he came into our program. But that wouldn't have happened if he had been dismissed because he was a drunk. It happened because the person was willing to talk to him and then give him a resource that he could use later.
That's great. Got another question here. It says, my mom is 60 years old, homeless near Orange County. She's never had a job and knows little English. How could your program help her get home, or any help?
That's a great question too. So our program is a back to work program, which means that at the end of it, we want people to be employed. that doesn't mean that you can't do it if you've never had a job. So I would encourage her to go to rescuemission.org, or if she knows where our facility is, that she would just come. She can come Monday through Friday from 8 to 4:30 and talk to the people there in our intake department. And if our program is not right for her, we have hundreds of referral agencies that we can point her to. It's not one size fits all necessarily, and we want to make sure that people get the help that is suited to them. So I would just encourage her to make that step, make that call, or at least come in, and our intake staff can talk to her. And I would encourage her to come into our program if she's willing. And she, 60 years old, that doesn't mean she can't work. That doesn't mean that she can't still provide for herself. But that's where I would start.
Great. Jen Makovic says, how does the human trafficking factor into the homeless problem? How can those victims be helped?
That is a great question. In fact, in the last 2 years, we've started a anti-human trafficking program. That is a very, very difficult question. I've come to understand the depths of depravity that are happening in the trafficking world that I had no idea. Right, and just in Orange County, that women are basically held as slaves by their traffickers. They're brainwashed. They're threatened that if they leave, that their families will be harmed. This is happening right under our nose, and there's a viable market for it. You hear these stories and you go, how can that even happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happens, because there's a market for it. And so our goal with our Strong Beginnings program, which is our human trafficking program, is to get people in an emergency setting. Just say, you're coming off the streets tonight. We partner with a really cool ministry that is headed up by a ex-police officer that they go out onto the streets in some of the areas of town where it's obvious that there's trafficking going on. And they use female volunteers to go and talk to the ladies in a sort of non-threatening, unassuming way. And if they can get the ladies to agree to it, they will actually arrange a situation where it looks like a customer is coming to pick them up, and then they take them out of there and bring them to our facility. So that's the start of it. And from there, it becomes a long process of, we have some great volunteers and some great programming around that, of helping women find their dignity again and helping them to begin the road to recovery. And if at the end of that emergency setting, they will come into the Village of Hope and begin the whole 24-month transition program. So it is a very long process, and the front end of it can be a little dangerous, but there are volunteers that thrive in this, and that just kind of speaks to that God can use you, and he can use your background in ways that maybe you wouldn't have thought. But we have these former police officers, retired police officers, that are going out there making this happen.
Can people directly give to that in your ministry, Bryan, if they're interested in that? I know a lot of people want to, somehow, we all do, we want to stop sex trafficking. Of course, there would be no sex trafficking if there wasn't demand for it, just like there would be no drug use if there wasn't demand for it. So is there something that people can do to either give to your ministry or to give to any ministry on the citygatenetwork.org site to try and fund that? Can they give to fund that kind of ministry? Sure.
I don't know about nationally speaking of any one silver bullet ministry on that. I know at rescuemission.org, if you make a donation there and specify it's for the Strong Beginnings human trafficking program, they can do that there.
Okay, good.
Got this comment by Jonathan Noyes, and I know you guys know him with Stand to Reason. He says
as well. He's a great.
Yeah, he says he's spoken at the Rescue Mission. He's volunteered. He says you're doing a wonderful job, and the OC Rescue Mission is a special place. So that is a nice comment there. I do have one. It says, how many people you serve in that facility? How many volunteers, staff does it require to maintain it? And how much, you guys are maintain? How much does it take to maintain what you're doing?
Sure. So our flagship campus can house 262 people. Across all of our campuses, we can house close to 500 people. We have a staff of paid employees of around 100 across all the different ministries, but really our entire staff, if you consider all volunteer positions, is closer to 500 people. So that's really 400 volunteer positions. Now, some of those are staffed by the students in our program, but others are by volunteers from churches. And you add all of that up, you get to 400 positions. You take the guy that tutors 2 days a week in our high school diploma center, and that's part of it. And you just add all of that up. And so that's one way of saying that the paid staff is not enough. We can't operate without all of the volunteers, which incidentally, Frank, has been an issue in the midst of the COVID crisis, because we've had to severely curtail how many people can come and go. And so that's one of the things that in the short term we're making do, but in the long term, we can't sustain without having more volunteer involvement at the level that we normally do.
What kind of volunteering can people do right now, not just at your rescue mission, but generally at rescue missions around the country? What can they do, Bryan? What can they volunteer to do?
Yeah, well, clearly the biggest need right now, not just rescue mission, is food banks. I've seen all of these food banks are having these large events, and the lines can be a mile long. You have families showing up that really had never been in a situation where they had to go get food at a food bank. You have hundreds of people in this situation. Mm-hmm. So I think the immediate need right now today is if you can partner with a local food bank that is doing food redistribution and man one of those events. And I know they're happening in abundance in Orange County. I got to assume they're happening in most places of the country. Okay. So that would be the number one thing in the short term. In the long term, of course, establish a relationship with your local ministry and see where your church and its gifts can help. Maybe it's running a Bible study. Maybe it's cooking and serving a meal. There's really no end to it, and it's just a matter of making the connection and deciding how you're going to help.
Do you want to know if there's a similar website for food banks like we have here for gospel rescue missions that are Christian oriented, that want to give people the gospel in addition to food? Is there such a place? Can they just call their rescue mission who would know who those people are?
I would probably go that route.
Okay.
Most of the food banks that I'm aware of are secular, the large ones. Now, there are smaller food pantries that are manned by churches, and those food pantries tend to get their product from the larger food banks. So I would start with your local rescue mission or even any church that you know has some sort of food ministry, because at some point they're connected to the larger food banks.
Again, go to citygatenetwork.org, citygatenetwork.org to find your local rescue mission. And from there, you can contact them to either help them or to figure out what local food bank exists that gives the gospel as well as food.
Got a comment related to that on YouTube. Says that he visited the website and did a search for missions, but it yields 0 results for California. They're asking if the search map is outdated or maybe something wrong with the website.
I'm not sure about that, because I actually went there and I put my zip code in, and it brought up ministries, and you can put 10 to I think up to 100 miles away. So maybe try it with a zip code search and not state search. I'm not sure, but I know that it yielded results when I tried it earlier.
Yeah, might have been a user error. So yeah, let's try that. Donovan Willis says, question, does it ever get to a point in which you stop giving the gospel of Jesus to someone as they are in your program? No, the answer to that is no. They can't really go through the program without hearing it. We ask everybody to attend a church service once a week. We have a Saturday night chapel service. Once a week, they meet with their case manager, and
those meetings include the progress that they're making through a discipleship book series that everybody reads as part of the program. Everybody is involved in Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christian, sort of a Christian version of AA. So it would actually be impossible for them to go through the program and not hear it. Can they nod and go along with it? Sure, they can. But it would not be possible for them to go through the program and not hear it.
Great. I have Grace Magdalene says, besides issues on volunteers during this period of time, are there any other issues that you're facing?
That's a good question. One of the things that is of interest to me in the last few years is that in California, well, in particular in Orange County, there's been this, as a result of a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of homeless people, the cities are now required to provide an emergency shelter in Orange County. So there's 34 cities, I believe, in Orange County, and all of them are taking steps to provide an emergency homeless shelter so that it's okay for them to run people out of the parks or out of other public places. So in other words, because of this lawsuit, they have to, when they ask someone to leave a public park and can't camp there, they have to, in the same conversation, offer them a place to go. Now, this sounds great. And on the face of it, well, how could you argue with that? But yet something that we've noticed is that there's now not an opportunity for people to hit rock bottom, which oddly enough is what spurs people to change. So in other words, in the efforts to make it so that everybody can go somewhere and have a bed, well, what we've really done is we haven't provided an opportunity for people to say, you know, I'm at the end of my rope. So instead, they go to the emergency shelter and they use drugs and they use alcohol and they perpetuate this lifestyle. And so it's an issue that's not going to go away. And there's no silver bullet answer to this, except that when a society finally says enough and says, we're not going to tolerate this type of behavior in public or whatever, that is when people realize, okay, I'm going to have to make a change. And it's when they realize they have to make a change that they go into a program that is more of a transitional, transformative program than just going and getting a bed for the night at the emergency shelter. So that's kind of a long response to an issue that I see growing as cities, especially in hard-hit cities where homelessness is a big issue, wrestle with this topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I have one for Frank, and then with that, Frank, I'll give it back to you. Random Pal and YouTube says, how would you explain Noah's Ark? I believe in God, but people have asked about Noah's Ark, saying it is scientifically impossible. I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, well, it's not impossible. The boat was apparently big enough, according to my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, who he and others investigated that. And in fact, it's not supposed to be explained naturally. When people say scientifically, this miracle isn't, of course it can't be explained naturally. That's the whole point. It's supposed to be a miracle. It's supposed to be that God directed all this. So it's kind of like saying, well, of course resurrections aren't possible because God doesn't exist. Well, of course, if God doesn't exist, resurrections aren't possible, but that's not the point. The point is, if this is a theistic universe, and it is, if Genesis 1:1 is true, as even atheists are admitting the data for, that the universe exploded into being out of nothing, then, quite obviously, resurrections are possible, Noah is possible, walking on water is possible. If God wants to do a miracle to get our attention, he can do it. So, and then, of course, if people are hung up on certain events in the Bible that they say, I don't know if I can believe that. Well, you don't have to believe in those events to be a Christian. You just have to believe in the resurrection, that Jesus rose from the dead. Once you become a Christian, however, and I think you'll see that Jesus actually teaches that those things actually occurred, then you'd be pretty silly to disagree with Jesus. I just have a personal policy. If somebody rises from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says, and Jesus rose from the dead. That's what the evidence shows. So it's on Jesus's authority that I believe in the Old Testament. even if I can't explain it, even if I go, I'm not that sure that really happened, or if Jesus is making the case it did, and Jesus is God, then I'm going to trust what he says. But even if I say, look, I don't agree with Jesus on that point, I can still be a Christian, just a foolish one. That's all.
Right. Good deal. I'll have to say something. There is a great video by Reasons for Hope on YouTube that explain how they worked in terms of after their own kind and the amount of species that are water species and all of that. So that is a great resource that you can go and check out. You just checked Noah's Ark, Reasons for Hope, and you will see it there.
Hey, Bryan, one other thing. Leave our viewers with just an idea or two of what they can do right now to help the hungry, to help the homeless. What can they do? And as we're locked down, all of us want to help. If we have the resources to help, we want to do it. So obviously they can give to Ocean County. I keep saying Ocean County, Orange County Rescue Mission. What else can they do?
Well, they can pray. I would start with that. Nothing's stopping us from praying while we're locked down. Mm-hmm. I would encourage people to make donations to their local rescue mission, and the true volunteer opportunities right now seem to be with food banks because they need people to man these events. So I would investigate that, and I would just not give up hope that on the other side of this, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to get done. We've been talking about is the medicine here going to be worse than the actual disease? And I fear that on the other side of this, there's going to be drug and alcohol addictions like we haven't seen before. There's going to be people unemployed. There's going to be people thrust into situations where they a year ago they had a job and were providing for their family, and now they don't know what they're going to do. And so on the other side of this, we are going to need people involved more than ever. So be ready for that. Start making the connections now with how you're going to plug in, because it's going to be needed. It's not going to go away. The ramifications of this are going to go on for a couple of years, probably at least, right?
Yeah,
so
easily.
Let's be ready for it. Let's find where we're going to serve when the powers that be let us out of our home confinement. Let's be ready and know what we're going to do and where we're going to do it on the other side.
And in the meantime, do what you can now. I know some people need volunteers. You may have to put a mask on to do it. You may have to drive to go bring food to people. Do it. You can not only help 501c3 organizations like Bryan's organization, the Orange County Rescue Mission. You can help the rescue missions in your hometown. You can help your church. You can help the food banks in your hometown. I would urge you to try and make sure you're if possible, given to a Christian food bank. And you can also just give to people directly that you know. It doesn't have to be a tax-deductible donation. If your neighbor needs money and you can help, why not help? Or somebody in your family, just help them out. That's what we're called to do. So, Bryan, thanks for doing this, and thanks for the hope you're bringing to people all over Orange County and around the world.
Thanks for having me, Frank. I appreciate it, and I've really enjoyed your Facebook live streams here, and also those podcasts with Dr. Dan. That was encouraging to me in the run up to all of this. It was a voice of sanity in the wilderness, and so I appreciate all you've been doing on this. Thanks.
Well, Dr. Dan is turning out to be right in terms of his predictions, and we'll talk about that on a future show. But yeah, he was correct that while this is bad, it's not as bad as people were saying in terms of the pandemic. Also want to mention, by the way, folks, for you guys watching, tomorrow we're going to have Dr. Stephen Meyer from the Discovery Institute on. We'll be talking about viruses. Are they intelligently designed? What does that say about God? Is God intelligently designing viruses to kill people? What about that? We'll get into the science of it and, of course, the philosophy of it with Dr. Stephen Meyer. And then on Wednesday, we're going to have Charlie Kirk. Have you ever heard of Turning Point USA? Charlie is bringing and creating these groups on college campuses that are giving an alternate view of the leftist kind of propaganda you hear on a college campus. He's bringing conservatives together on a college campus. It's very encouraging. We're going to have Charlie on. He's going to answer questions as well. So those are the next two shows. You don't want to miss them. Jorge, thanks so much for what you're doing. And we'll see you guys here tomorrow at 11:30 Eastern, right here for More Hope One.
See you tomorrow.